Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Chris Rotolo. I am a program manager with McMaster Continuing Education, and I'm very pleased to co-star with my colleague Rahan here today. I'm the opening act, but he'll be the star of the show. After Rahan's presentation of organizational readiness, I'll walk you through the related program to today's webinar, the Management Principles and Practices program. All of our programs are offered in flexible and convenient online formats to fit your lifestyle and your schedule. Ron, do you want to quickly
Yeah.
introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for that. Yeah, my name is Rahan Sher. I'm an instructor at McMaster Continuing Ed. I've been here for a few years now. I teach both in project management and change management. I'm happy to host today's session and explore how companies can assess and build readiness for successful transitions. Today, we'll explore some important aspects of change readiness, look at some actionable strategies, provide some insights, and look specifically at the course Management 203 and the entire certificate as a whole.
Well,
Before,
I'll jump in. Before we begin,
yeah,
just a few housekeeping items. This session's being recorded and it will be available on McMaster's website for future reference. There will be a dedicated questions and answers period after the presentation, but you don't have to wait then and hold on to your questions. If you have any questions, just type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and Rohan will address any subject matter questions. I'll address any program-related questions, but you should feel free to post your questions as they come up to you. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize that McMaster Continuing Education is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Now, let's dive into today's topic, and we'll start exploring how readiness can make or break the success of organizational change initiatives. I'd like to start just by quickly covering over the objectives of today, and we'll define change readiness, and we'll explain why it's critical in today's fast-paced world. We'll provide a brief overview of some of the tools and frameworks used to assess and build change readiness. We'll provide actionable insights and real-world examples, and we'll highlight the benefit of enrolling in Rahan's course, MGT 103, and the McMaster Management Principles and Practices program as a whole. I'd like to start with a poll that Rahan has asked us to complete. What brought you to the webinar today? If you can please just participate in the pop-up there. Right about 82 responses, 83. So, Rohan, it looks like a vast majority, 70% of people that have joined us today are here to learn about change management. So they're in the right place, talking to the right
yes.
person.
Right. All
And
right,
then
perfect.
then we have about 17% are here to learn about real world examples. So I'll they're eager to hear from you. I'll let you go.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Chris. I'll just move on to the next slide there and why change matters. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. All right. So why change management matters. So, and this is about empowering organizations to thrive in a world that's changing quite quickly. Right now, the goal is to what you see on the slide is to talk about some aspects of change management. First of all, what is it? Some statistics, and you'll see many of them, and I've just highlighted a few. An example of why change management is important through some real life example and a result of that. So change management, it's important to understand that project management and change management kind of go together. And many times project managers think about change as a process and they neglect the people side of it. And when they think about change, they think more about, well, do I have a change control process in place? And uh, can I make sure my scope is maintained? But the change we're talking about today is more about how do you actually empower and transition people, departments or teams, and the entire organization from where they are now as a current state to where they need to go as a future state to achieve some desired outcome. And so both kind of go together. Project management is about process and change management is about the people side. And there are, as I said, there are many statistics out there, and you'll see some here. 70% of change initiatives fail because there is resistance to change. And also there's a lack of readiness to change. And a good example of that you can see is Kodak, who failed to pivot digital photography. And they even had an opportunity to buy out Netflix before they became big. And they relied too much on traditional approaches, such as, charging late fees for people. That was their main driver for revenue. And instead, they could have had a subscription model. And when they got into the subscription model business, it was a bit too late. And so this is a good example of how, sometimes when you have to implement change, it has to be done quicker and earlier. And in order to do that, you need to have some sort of an approach that will engage employees as well to ensure success. Okay, Chris, maybe I can move on to the next slide. All right, here's a question for you, a discussion question. Maybe you could answer in the chat. What challenges has your organization faced recently? Maybe you can share one word in the chat. Anybody? Fatigue, change fatigue. Too many changes too fast. Yeah, resources and need a resistance to change. Okay, quite a few: resistance, rapid growth, restructuring, too many changes at one time. It's hard to address them all. A lot of growth going on too quickly, lack of communication. So all these are important reasons for why change management becomes a challenge. And I did also see a question here, sorry, in the chat about, so let me just go back up here. Some metrics about how to measure whether the change was successful. That's a good question. I mean, how do you know a change worked? There could be many other approaches. There could be the adoption rate, how many people, what percentage of employees are using your new approach or your new system. Compliance, are people adhering to it, to the new policies? Has there been an improvement in productivity, customer satisfaction? And we'll talk about a few others, such as employee sentiment as well. So there are metrics you could use to measure success. Even training is another example as well. All right, very good. Thank you for all that. So this is good. I mean, gives you some ideas of some of the change. And so this kind of is a good segue into the next slide about the evolution of change management and how we got here. And a lot of times, if you even reflect on yourself, when you need to change as an individual. And that's why when we teach change management, the first focus is on the person before you get to teams and the organization, is how willing are you as a person to change? And, you know, most of the time when people change, it's reactive because we're waiting for something on the outside to make the change. A good example is what's happening on in the continuing, I mean, even in the education space, you could see it in the news, something happens with the government, it impacts, foreign students, and now, the institutions are reacting to it. So sometimes change is usually been implemented when we're responding to an external pressure. And that often leads to a lack of buy-in, and it usually leads to what we call change failure. And according to some of the messages that we see in the chat, that's also some of them as well, is that sometimes changes happen too fast. There's too many of them. It's too hard to keep up. Technology keeps getting updated, and it leads to resistance. Another reason that you see here is siloed change processes as well. And what we mean by siloed is that a lot of times people want to handle their change on their own. They'd rather just focus on their own department. They're not really concerned about organization-wide alignment. And you're starting to see that's also changing as well. Companies are thinking more cross-functionally as well in project management language, having project managers and change managers in place to make sure changes are implemented across the board so that everyone understands what's happening. There's also limited employee involvement. Some employees get involved late in the process. I've had experience with that as well on projects where the employees who are end users, when they're not involved in the design or it's too late, they end up resisting because they weren't part of the initial process. And so that leads to a slower adoption. And the last one, there, low technology integration. A lot of companies still rely on manual processes. They struggle to monitor progress or measure the impact effectively as well. So this is kind of looking at how we've gotten to change at this point. All right, thank you. All right, so change management today, where we are, what needs to shift. Well, the first one is it's still natural for us to be a bit reactive and waiting for something to force us to change, and that I don't think that will change. But we do also have to be proactive as well. Can we anticipate change rather than just reacting to change? Can we, think about change as a way, can we think about doing things before other organizations are doing them as well? Maybe we could also, transform the change, use project management tools as well, focus on employees, particularly those who are most resistant to change. And training is definitely something that would help in that process as well. All right, the next slide. So this slide is important for those who are learning about change and want to get involved in change. I'll just put in the chat. This organization, ProSci, is a well-known organization. Some of you might have heard of it. And there are competitors to ProSci. I know PMI is also trying to get into the change management space, but they're pretty much, ProSci is pretty much the organization that started this whole discipline of change management way back in the mid-90s. And according to them, there are many significant changes happening, particularly with technology. You're seeing the changes with AI, evolving regulatory demands, sustainability challenges as well. And yeah, Chris, we can go on to the next slide. This gives you some examples of some of those changes. Technology and digital transformation, you'll hear that phrase a lot as well. 37% of companies are looking at AI-driven tools to help improve customer support and satisfaction. There's also regulatory changes and compliance, and the rest of them are a little less percentage, but they're also important. Adhering with regulations, sustainability, talent retention, cultural changes. These are all examples of some of the top trends in change management. Okay. So as I was saying, ProSci is the probably the most recognized organization when it comes to change management. And one of the models that they built, or the framework for change, and there are many of them, is called ADKAR. Okay. And ADKAR was what started Jeff Hyatt's founding of ProSci. And it focuses on the people side of change, and it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And these are the steps that you can follow if you're going through a change to ensure that people are aware of the change, they have a desire to change, there's knowledge about the change, they have an ability to change, um, and you'll reinforce that change. A good example is if you think of a tech startup that implements a new project management platform, one way to raise awareness is with town halls. So if you were starting the change initiative, you could have town halls to raise awareness. How would you create a desire for that change? You could have a reward program for those who are early adopters. Knowledge, you could provide knowledge with hands-on workshops. Ability, you can provide ability or build people's ability by giving them practice or on-the-job mentoring. You can reinforce the change through weekly check-ins, celebrate success, recognize employees. So this is kind of the idea of the model. It's fairly simple, but it is one of the more popular frameworks that organizations use when trying to implement change. Okay, on to the next slide, Chris. We can start with a discussion question for the audience. And so if you think about those steps that we highlighted, which step does your organization struggle with the most and why? So again, that's going back to ADKAR, the awareness, the desire, knowledge, the ability, the reinforcement. Is there a step in that model that you're struggling with the most, and why? Want to share? Desire looks like desire.
Awareness and desire, it looks very
Yeah,
much like a vast majority of them are having trouble just getting started.
getting started. Yeah. And has anyone tried an approach like or have you thought about what could kickstart the awareness, or what could help motivate the desire? Does anyone have suggestions or ideas for that? Having the right people in the room, addressing the fears, exactly. And that's important. Incentives. Many times people resist change because they're more afraid of what they're going to lose rather than the change itself. Yeah, ensuring the right people are in place. What's in it for me? Yeah, people need to know why they're changing as well. And I think that's also important. People are overworked, burnt out. Okay. Putting a positive spin. And this is, having a change champion is definitely important. How will it help people? Okay. Very good. Yeah, early information, the communication is definitely important as well. Yeah. Yeah, if it's too big, if the scale is too big, if it's too large, it'll be hard to reinforce and support. Very good. Yeah, that's why having a framework or an approach is important too. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we'll move on to the next slide there. All right. Yeah, so these are also some tools that maybe some of you have seen, and I'll admit I've used some of these in different capacities, mostly on SharePoint, but there are many tools now that can make your life a lot easier, especially when you're trying to enable change and trying to make people's lives a lot easier and more automated. And these are some examples here. One is automating complex tasks for change. For example, you could send out reminders for change milestones. One of them is called Power Automate, and I don't know if people have used it. People usually use this for sending out reminders to themselves or to others about things they have to do, or scheduling, you know, automated emails, simple things that are repetitive that you do on a continual basis could help individuals become much more efficient with their time. Qualtrics is another example, and you've probably heard of this now with AI, with something called natural language processing. You see it a lot on social media where they do sentiment analysis through surveys. So you could do that as a good way to create awareness when you first kickstart your project or your change initiative, to see, who's actually resisting and what language are they using in their surveys. Can that tell us if people have a positive view about the change, or are they negative about it, or more neutral? And so Qualtrics is another tool that you can use to get some responses from people, and it can analyze people's sentiment as well. And there's also chatbots out there. If you're doing, for example, a new HR system rollout, or you're also doing a new change management initiative, you could actually use a chatbot to have questions and to help employees minimize their fears and their resistance to the change as well. So these are some examples of tools that could be used to help you manage change. All right, moving on to the next. Okay, so yeah, you've probably heard this before as well. AI is not replacing people. It's not replacing change management professionals. And a lot of times, you'll hear many things. AI is not uh, replacing you, but if you don't use it, then the people who do use it will replace you. So it is important to realize that industry is at a crossroads. You have to accept that AI there is a revolution now. It is disrupting the market. And change management is becoming more and more important now. And how quickly you adopt to the change, how much of an urgency you create in your organization to start implementing change is important. Um, it's also important to recognize that change management isn't just about policing, it's about facilitating, and it's about creating that environment and culture where embracing and adopting new technology is good, and not necessarily something to fear. All right. And here's some other examples of real world successes about companies that have failed and those that have succeeded in implementing change. Amazon is clearly a good example of one that's demonstrated change. Um, they're very good at having small, autonomous, agile teams. They're very customer centric. They make decisions very quick. They enable a lot of team members to make decisions fast. They embrace the change. They regularly test and try out new technology. They take more risks. And as a result, they've managed to sustain and grow past many of their competition. Blockbuster is another good example of one that has failed. Similar to Kodak, they were slow to change. They didn't want to shift to online streaming. They had a traditional rental model. And then they lost market dominance to companies like Netflix. And so change readiness is really important because that determines whether a company will survive or not. All right, moving on to the next slide. Here's another discussion question. What lessons can you take from these examples? Um, and is change management um, urgent for you, or is it something that can wait? What are your thoughts? This is for the audience. Yeah, adapt or die. Urgent. Okay. Yeah, it is definitely always urgent. Okay. Right, being positive doing a reorganization. Exactly. So if you are the change manager, if you are the change champion, if you are the sponsor of the change, then definitely being positive is important. Preparing is key. It looks like many people view change as being urgent. And generally when you look at all the models as well, you'll find the same sentiment that if you're going to implement change, it's got to be urgent as well. All right, so moving along, I just thought I'd put in a framework for you that maybe when you walk away from this seminar, you could try to implement yourself. And it's just a three-step process that I created. The first thing is assessing change readiness. The second one is defining your change strategy. And the third is actually executing and sustaining the change. And I'll just go through these one by one. And let's see what we got. So Chris, yeah, just on the next slide, we'll go on to step one. So when you assess change readiness, there are a number of components to it. Um, the first one that always comes up is a company's culture. And culture is a big subject, and it comes down to many parts. What's the leadership style of the organization? Is it authoritative, democratic? What kind of, how do people function in the organization? Are they more individual siloed, or do they work in teams and collaborate? Um, is it an open door policy? Is it closed door? Do people identify with the organization or not? Do the leaders lead by example? So that's the culture aspect. Okay. Then the mindset of the people. How ready are they to change, and are they resistant? Have they been there for a long time in the organization? Um, how many projects have they worked on in the organization, or have they just done their similar job for a long time? Because a lot of times when people have been there for a lengthy period of time, their mindset might be closed. Do they have a growth mindset? And what are the barriers and resistance to change that need to be addressed? And that will come through your surveys. What's your goal from this change? What do you ultimately want? Do you want efficiencies? Do you want to reduce cost? Do you want to improve profit? Do you want more market share? What are your goals? And how will you achieve it through automation, scalability? And then also think about your pain points. Prioritize those pain points. What's really causing you to be held back? So that's the first part of it, assessing your change readiness. So there are, a number of parts to that you have to think about. So Chris, yeah, the second step, I'll just move on to the next slide. So building your strategy, and this is also important. You know, the first part, when you talk about is you start with the individuals and the teams, and now when you start building your framework, you have to actually start thinking about a model that you're going to use. Some organizations have their own model that they've developed because they've been managing projects for a long time. So you need some kind of a framework, or else it's going to be very hard to implement change if you don't have a process or steps to follow. So again, once you have your clarity on your objectives, whether it's efficiency or transformation of some kind, digital, cultural, and so on, you need to choose a framework. And I mentioned ADKAR is one, I'll mention another popular one, which is John Cotter, and he has an 8-step approach. And there are some consulting organizations that like this approach. It is also very structured and it's also very helpful. So both the ADKAR and Cotter are popular approaches out there. There is another one that I was just talking to a colleague about. It's called Blast Radius. And that just really, if you look at, when you're looking at a radius, you see who are the people most affected by it in the center. And then the impact of the change kind of lessens as you move out of the radius. And so that's another one that you could look at. But definitely, my advice is that if you're looking to implement change, definitely focus on a step-by-step approach. Okay. And the third thing is, and this is just coming back to what project managers typically do, is once you have a model, you also have to execute and sustain it. So, and this is where thinking like a project manager would help. Having some kind of a change tool. There's many out there. You do need a software tool to help you stay organized and scheduled. Asana is an example of one that's popular. Trello, many of you might have used already. There's also MS Project. Okay, there's many software tools, but whatever works for your organization. Some people like Asana and Trello because they have a nice visual Kanban board, and they don't need a complicated Gantt chart to follow along what people are doing. But definitely think of a tool that will help you implement the change. And then you have to monitor and reinforce. And to do that, you have to let the change happen. And then, after 6 months, maybe do an effectiveness check. How good was this change? Are we doing our regular check-ins? Are we providing ongoing support and training and surveys to see what people think of the change? Is there something that we need to do different? Okay. So these are my 3 steps that I thought would be helpful. Assessing your change, using a framework, and sustaining the change. Yeah. And I think,
I'm going to jump in for a bit.
yeah,
Thank
sure,
you.
go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. So I think it's obvious to everybody that we have a depth of expertise on the subject matter here. Rohan is one of our instructors in our management principles and practices program. The management principles and practices program is about like core foundational skills and best practices. If you're looking for a leadership opportunity in your organization. So here you learn how to effectively manage, how to lead, and how to strategize to help you stand out in the business that you work at and help your business stand out in the environment that it exists in. So the goal of the program is to help you develop essential skills and best practices around supervision and management, of which, just like discussing today, some examples are like change management and leadership are really important aspects when we're talking about industries and the technology coming into them, some of which Rohan talked about today, that are driving a really fast pace of change. So we need leaders that are capable of being resilient and at the same time adapting to that pace of change. And additionally, in this program, you explore the purpose and the impact of communication as an aspect. I know when we get to the Q&A portion of today, I have a couple of questions for Rohan myself around change management and the practice of it. And here you have the opportunity to earn a certificate in management principles and practices. This program was developed for participants who, you may already have an education and you want to add to your existing education, perhaps in business administration, or perhaps you have like a technical expertise. And so this can be good for individuals that are seeking management training as part of their professional development goals, and a great signal to employers that you were making that effort to make yourself change ready and to make yourself leadership ready, because you'll get the chance through our program to develop competencies in supervision, management, leadership, all further to your career growth goals. And there's several reasons that you might want to consider the program. So the obvious is the gaining the skills, the knowledge, the latest management and leadership frameworks, tools, best practices, some of which were touched on. Uh, McMaster, of course, has a reputation for outstanding and relevant programs and a long, long history of contributing the knowledge of the university into the community itself. Upon completion of the program, depending on which type of certificate that you complete, you can get a certificate in management principles and practices or a certificate of professional learning in management principles and practices. And that's just really about the number of courses that you complete alongside. Our courses are taught by professionals with decades of knowledge and experience, like Rahan, in the field, working with people, processes, and change management. This program is exclusively online, and online learning gives you the flexibility to work with, for us to work with you with multiple learning styles at varied paces. It's a competitively priced program, and the program is open enrollment, which means there's no formal application or admission procedure. And you can initially take just a course like change management if that's an area that you're interested in. And then if you find value in the course, which I'm sure you will, you may decide to complete one, two, or several more in pursuit of the certificate. But it needn't be done with a commitment to the whole certificate at once. So in terms of the content covered in the program, some of the learning outcomes are around your ability to identify the importance of interpersonal relationships and how they impact company success, demonstrate understanding of the functional areas of management, so HR, finance, marketing, etc. Demonstrate appropriate knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior that are required for you to achieve success in a changing business environment. Describe strategies for ongoing personal and professional development to enhance workplace performance as a leader, to identify, select, and compile information as part of developing strategies, to demonstrate knowledge and skills in the areas that you're choosing to study, and basically to exemplify the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors required for you to work and collaborate across cultures, across silos, and effectively develop good personal management skills. So all of our programs, as I said, are offered in flexible and convenient online formats, so you can find a way to fit them into your lifestyle and schedule. This program, as I mentioned, is completed online and asynchronously, though there are 2 to 3 optional recorded live sessions if you want or need more. If you want to connect with Ron for like some live discussion as part of the course, those are offered several times through each semester. I mentioned that there were 2 certificates that you could pursue. The Certificate of Professional Learning in Management Principles and Practices requires 3 courses, and the Certificate in Management and Principles and Practices requires 5 courses, including the 3 Management Principles and Practices courses and other complementary ones that you might want to consider. Things like negotiation skills, design thinking, emotional intelligence at work, navigating the workplace conflict, giving and receiving constructive feedback, and courses in financing, coaching, HR, critical thinking, etc. So there are a few upcoming key dates that you might want to know. So our fall term starts November 15th. Our spring term is starting in May. If you want to look at earlier enrollment than that, our winter registration generally happens in January. So we've just missed the January enrollment, but our spring and fall enrollment are coming up. I'd strongly suggest that you consider the program. You can see that we've put a lot of effort. This is probably a one of a kind program, the course, the change management course that Rahan has developed. He might not have been as clear on it, but he's both ProSci and PMP certified, which means that you're learning from an expert in both project management and change management as part of learning about change management in our program. If you can take a look at the chat, our next management webinar, if you want to find out more about this program, is taking place February 27th. So in 2 days, we have a webinar on managing the hybrid workforce. And we can also share with everybody when the next upcoming management business, I guess, info session is that goes further into our management principles and practices program, as well as a few others that we have. So we'll now look to do some Q&A. So let's take a look at what questions some of you might have. I can see there's one already. So Rahan, one question that's come in is, how can their leadership recognize the societal, cultural, and technological trends that will necessitate change? In other words, how does one recognize when the writing is on the wall?
That's a good question. And I guess it's a hard one to answer. I think, a lot of times maybe what you need is having someone in the organization sort of take the initiative to start noticing these societal changes or cultural changes that are happening outside before they impact the organization. I think it's important to start thinking in sort of a project management, change management way, so that you start noticing these changes before they happen. So probably doing a competitive analysis, looking at around your organization, looking at industries to see what your competition is doing, keeping a pulse on what's happening, keeping up with the news and information. I don't think there's a concrete way to do it, but somebody within the organization, usually the change manager, the project manager, or somebody with that role, needs to keep a pulse on what's happening. And I think that's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else have a question?
I definitely do.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not an expert in it, but I've always been fascinated about it. I'm aware of it, and I sometimes talk to my students when I
Yeah.
teach about it. There
Yeah.
is a change management equation, or there's a couple of them, right? There's the Dannemiller and the Gleicher version. And
Right.
I mean, I can post them into the chat if you think it would be helpful to talk to
Yeah.
that. But really, my interest in it is it always really just seems to say that the cost of change needs
Yes.
to be less than the pain or the benefit.
Yeah.
Would you care to tell us a bit about your thoughts there?
I mean, I think I mean, the cost of change has to be obviously less than the benefits. Before it's kind of like the return on investment, right? I mean, does it make sense to take part in this change? And I think that's true for any project. And that's probably the most fundamental thing you want to do when you first start out any change initiative or any project is there a business case for this change? Does it make sense? Um, you know, does it make sense to open up a new hospital, and is it feasible, before you even start? So I think there are some financial metrics or things to look at, like, is there a positive net present value when we take on this change? Um, what return can we expect, and how long will it take, and what's our payback period? So I think it's an important thing to expect. I think I know what you're saying with the change management equation, but I think that's generally true for any project. before you even embark on the change, it has to make good business sense. So I think there's truth to that.
The other thing that you kind of
Yeah,
spoke to it indirectly just
yeah,
now, and you kind of and someone asked you
right.
earlier in the presentation, and you spoke to it then, is
Yeah,
measures of success.
right.
When I like to look at things through the framework of like theory of change and logic models in terms of like causality in a framework or structure to it myself in my head. And it was interesting because I recognized that some of the impact measurement, if we can call it that, that you spoke to,
Yeah,
some were outputs and some were outcomes. Some were about quantity and pace, and some were about result, which I found interesting because to me, when you start saying, how do I measure change? My head's immediately going to just the outcomes.
yeah,
Did we move the
right.
needle on the stuff that connects to our objectives? Can you maybe speak about the value of outputs as well?
Yeah, that's a good point. It comes up a lot, even in project management, this subject. I mean, project managers, and that's why the subjects are so closely tied. It's just that project managers typically care about outputs and deliverables and what are we going to create for the client. And the client is going to turn around and say, well, so what? You created all of this output, but what outcome does it lead to? And, has it led to more efficiency? Has it led to more productivity? Has it improved profit? And all of those outcomes are important because that adds value to the organization. So, I think, as project manager, this is, it's important. I think you have to think about both, to be honest. You have to think about the outputs, you have to think about the outcomes, because the outcomes are really tied to the value and the benefit the company gets, right? So it's important that change managers and project managers think about both. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I think that speaks to why our change management course in this program is about among one of my favorite courses, and why we seem to get so much interest in it from other programs.
Right.
It couldn't have been developed by a better subject matter expert.
Oh,
Like that
thank you,
that
Chris.
vision that you bring of project management and change management is a pretty good balance to accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, but at the same time with a North Star pushing towards business goals.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to monopolize the Q&A because there's
Yeah.
other people that have questions as well. Chris asks, how can you bridge the gap if you were too late to change?
Yeah. How can you bridge the gap if you're too late to change, so that you're not kind of eliminated, I guess? Uh, that's a good question. I mean, what you could do is start focusing on the aspects of the business that are really not uh, doing well, maybe, and maybe start eliminating that first so that, you're not losing in all areas, and then maybe this is where the priority comes in, is if you've kind of missed the boat, start focusing on those business areas that are really doing well or performing well and generating the most amount of money and or saving you the most amount of cost, and eliminate those areas or departments that are not. And I think I would start with that. I think that's what I would
You
focus on.
gave two opposite answers, but they're not contradictory.
Yeah.
Makes me think of like a Taos analysis, right? Like
Yeah.
figure out whether you can have more impact in shoring up your weakness or
Right.
in exploiting your strength relative to threats and opportunities. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So,
There's one question here that I think's towards me, so I'll answer it as best as I
sure,
can. So
yeah.
it says, as a McMaster employee, is it possible to use the tuition assistance and bursary benefits to cover the cost of these courses, both the management principles and practices, and also the ProSci change management? So Daniela, the change management course that Rahan teaches is one of three that are core courses for the management principles and practices. Um, my understanding, and this is one person to another, and please don't take this as gospel, is that any academic course can being the keyword, qualify for the tuition assistance and bursary. Um, all the courses in this program are academic credit courses. They are, they're developed and run by Continuing Ed, but we do them in partnership with the faculty. And in this case, Management Principles and Practices was done in partnership with the group, which everyone has heard of. But for an actual answer to your question, I would have to point you towards your direct supervisor and or HR specialist and check in with them. But, there's a great support, not just to share what we know within the university into the community, but also within our own community. So I encourage you to do that. I couldn't be prouder of Rahan's change management course. It really is, I think, a jewel in continuing ed.
Thank you.
And that's a great point. Our marketing specialist has suggested we have live chat 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on the Continuing Ed website, and you can just generally contact our information specialists. Their role is to help you figure out all of these details. Savita asked, will a recording of today's session be shared? And I think that was answered earlier in the Q&A. Marketing said the webinar will be sent to everyone who registered, but will also be available on our YouTube channel. Ron, if I can, I have one more
Sure,
question
yeah.
for you,
Yeah.
since nobody else has asked one yet.
Yeah.
Early on and before coming to McMaster, I was actually having conversations with Deloitte, and I was
Right.
looking at how the big four companies do change management, because that's specifically what they were recruiting me about. I don't have a pro sci.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert to your level. A lot of more practical experiences, I
Yeah.
imagine some of our participants have. So in preparing for that, I was like, okay, let me understand how they do it. And for a long time, my experience with the big four was through my past history in marketing agencies and such, right? Where we were getting squeezed from both sides. The boutique agencies at the bottom saying, I do all your video, I might as well do all your content, right? And
Right.
the big four saying, we do all of your other strategies, let us do your marketing strategy. And so that was my only experience with the big four before starting these conversations. I found that that all of the big four, and for those who don't know what I'm talking about like the Ernst and Youngs, the KPMGs, the Deloitte, etc., the big four like management consulting, accounting, auditing type agencies.
Yeah.
It seemed like, so three silos, one where you might consider it the actual like project management strategy planning portion of change management, but
Right.
that was almost just the cost of entry, and a large portion of their focus seemed to fall into almost like what your background is, right? The
Right.
HR capacity of it and talent and the learning aspect of it.
Right.
Maybe you could talk to us a bit about why such an outsized focus on talent and training as part of change management.
Yeah. I think um from what I've found in, your project management planning is important, right? You need a scope, you need a work breakdown structure, you need schedules and all that good stuff. But I think what happens is that it tends that project managers tend to overlook a lot of the training, and many of the projects I've worked on, particularly in pharma, where there's so much regulatory influence and there's um, a real emphasis on whether or not employees have followed a process. So then training and change management come into play because it's helpful for improving their productivity, their efficiencies, making sure there's no knowledge gaps and there's no skill gaps, and making sure they comply with requirements. So what I've noticed is that it's kind of like what we said, you have a project, you want to implement a new ERP system, you want to implement a new learning and development plan, you have a project plan in place, but in order for that to really work, this is where the change management comes in, is have you thought about the people? Have you thought about the training? Have you thought about how you're going to transfer the knowledge over to the person to make sure that it's reinforced and that they've bought into it. So from what I've seen, I can see why consulting agencies are very much focused on talent capacity and HR, and less on the project management side, because at the end of the day, as one person put it, project management is about people management as well. So I think for those reasons, this is why HR and leadership and training become quite important on many projects.
Almost to
Yeah.
go full circle back to general
Yeah.
management principles and practices
Yeah.
being valuable as part of change management.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, and there's only so many that I have.
Yep.
So,
Perfect.
um, I'd like to thank you very much for participating in our workshop today. Um, Rahan, I don't know if you'd
Yeah.
like any last words.
Yeah, sure. I want to also thank you all. Thank you everyone for joining today. And if we couldn't get to your questions, or if you'd like more information, obviously, as Chris has said, there is the website MC, and there's also the email mc@mcmaster.ca. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Your engagement today was truly appreciated. And thank you also to the McMaster team for putting this together. So thanks very much.
And if you'd like further information in regards to management principles and practices certificate, or how courses like Rahan's change management course can help advance your career, just email us or visit the website. As I said earlier, the website has live chat from 10 to 2 where you can talk to somebody whose sole purpose is to help you navigate all this.
Perfect.
So thank you very much, everybody, for your
Thank you
time.
so much.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you spending your lunch with us, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks, Rahan.
Thanks.
We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. All right.